In the middle of tremendous darkness and personal tragedy, false lights are trying to guide us, and they can bring shipwreck. We must be focused on God's pathways and His light in the storms of life. Christ is the light of navigation. Hello, and welcome to the Light of Navigation and this Reflections podcast. My name is Marguerite Lever-Woodall, and I'm an author, speaker, and your host. In these podcasts, I love to explore and contemplate different life issues and their solutions through the lens of God's wisdom and words. In episode 15, called Another Country, I'm sharing God's much greater viewpoint on things. My story here is brief but powerful. Join me in giving thought on the tough issues of life, and let's discover God's pathways through them. I quietly listened for God's voice in the early morning hours as I sat and prayed. At the end of my devotional time, I also thought about an upcoming trip to Europe. I had planned the trip for 3 years for my son and I. I remembered how excited Randall was when I shared with him some of the events that had been planned for it. As each year passed, I had steadily put every bit of income I could toward its costs and paid for many things ahead of time. We would stay in Rome for a week, visit Pompeii, then board a ship for a 7-day cruise of the Mediterranean. There would be visits to different ports of call in Italy, Spain, and France. This would be a grand adventure for both of us, a trip of a lifetime. And I wanted to connect more deeply with my son during the trip. After my husband's death, I had stayed in Florida for 15 years instead of moving to the West Coast and living by my own family. It was important to me for Randall to finish high school, to spend time with his grandparents and friends, instead of uprooting him. I wanted him to retain the stability of surrounding family that he was familiar with, especially with his grandparents. They doted on him. In addition, his grandmother would have an opportunity to be a part of her grandson's life for several years until he graduated. I sensed that it would be some healing for her with her grandson still being a part of her life. Her son, my husband, was her only child. I knew that her grandson's presence would be a tremendous comfort to her in the middle of the horrifying grief she was going through. And my heart broke for her. After those years in Florida had passed, there was a gentle conviction from the Lord placed upon my heart to move. There was family in another state that I had not come to know more because of an earlier move in my youth. I had left home at the age of 18. Though I wanted my son to move with me, he chose to stay. At the age of 18 himself now, I could not legally force him to move as well. That left both of us with monthly phone calls and only an occasional visit from each other out of state when our finances had permitted. It was very heart-wrenching for me, being apart from my son. Knowing that Randall's grandparents would be present and watching out for him put me at ease somewhat. Over the following years, I missed being physically present to encourage and comfort him when he was down or needed me, or to celebrate a life event with him. At the age of 32, Randall's presence on our trip together would also be a time of reconnection. I'd hoped for an even deeper relationship to be fostered between us since I'd moved. And looking further down the road in time, I had planned on moving back if he married and I could be a part of his life journey again with possible grandchildren to love as well. My final thoughts this particular morning ended with the imagined visit to see the historical ruins of Rome and Pompeii and their sites, and my son's death also, before we could even go. Not quite 2 years after Randall's passing, and having put the trip off more than once because of it, I decided to go forward with the plans. The expenses had been paid for, and there would be significant financial loss if I didn't go. I'd canceled and moved the reservations twice, and I could not cancel and move them anymore. As I sat there, I wondered what it would have been like for Randall to have seen all the majesty of Rome's once great civilization. I have a deep love and passion for these ancient civilizations, especially the ruins that are left behind, and how those people lived in their times historically. There was the Roman Forum, Palatine Hill, the Colosseum, and Pompeii. They had all been on the itinerary for us. I shared with the Lord the deep sadness in my heart, knowing my son would not be on the trip that I had planned for us for so long. I lamented out loud and offhandedly said, "Lord, my son Randall will not be with me to see the magnificent ancient ruins from long ago that I so much wanted him to see." I stood up moments later as my devotional time came to an end. When I began to walk away, I suddenly heard God loudly, distinctly, and plainly say, "Your son is seeing a far greater country without the ruins of men." Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Hebrews 11:6. Thank you for taking time to listen today. If this podcast would be an encouragement or comfort for someone you know, please pass it on. Your comments are valued, and subscribing is also deeply appreciated. In the next episode of Reflections called Safely Home, I'll share how God can reach out through a direct word and poetically reassure and comfort us.